I can see my colleague Kerry Allen nodding to that comment of mine. She's a China media analyst, and with her help, thank you, Kerry, for coming down here. We wanted to examine how those protests are being covered both in Hong Kong and in mainland China. So if you can begin with just explaining how the media is different in both those territories.
It's completely different. So Hong Kong's media environment is very similar to a lot of countries in the West. People can access any website they want. They can turn on TV stations that are owned by many, many different countries, and they can watch what they want freely. But in mainland China, the government wants absolute control, and it's one of the most tightly controlled media environments in the world. So anything that's not owned by China, and I'm talking TV broadcasters, radio stations, social media platforms, even things like Facebook that we kind of think of as universal, people can't access them. What will happen is if they typed Facebook into, well, they couldn't even get on Google, but if they went on if they tried to type in facebook.com, what would happen is the page would load, and then it would just show an error message saying that people can't view that website.
So, and we're hearing that in Hong Kong, where those protests were happening, which may not have been actually spoken about in Chinese media, as you just explained, journalists were actually withdrawn from the protest because they became too violent.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've been doing today is I've been watching on one screen Hong Kong live footage from independent broadcasters in Hong Kong, and what CCTV, the main broadcaster in mainland China, has been showing. And in China, in mainland China, in Beijing, there's a huge parade going on. There's been this military parade. There's been children smiling, fireworks. It's all been a huge extravaganza, just so much happiness. That's the kind of message that Beijing's been putting across. On the contrary, what I've seen in Hong Kong, so many different stations, RTHK, Apple Daily, these are independent or pro-democracy stations. They've just shown huge police forces grappling with demonstrators. And I mean, I've seen things like fires today. I've seen injured people being given water. The images are so strikingly different. You've got this on one side in Beijing, these really happy images and the idea of that the whole country is united. But Hong Kong is technically a part of China, and on the contrary, it looks like unrest. It looks like there's not going to be a resolution to this, or if there is, it's not going to be a pretty one.
And in Beijing, where would people, or not just Beijing, but all of China, where would people go to access news which is outside of the main broadcaster? Alternate opinion.
What they'd have to do is they'd have to have access to a piece of software known as a VPN, and what they could do then is bypass what's known as the Great Chinese Firewall, and that's the system in place that restricts people from accessing these foreign websites like Facebook, for example. So they'd have to have a piece of software, or they'd have to travel to Hong Kong or to Taiwan. They'd actually have to leave the country. Otherwise, they just wouldn't be able to access these websites. And also, the government actively censors terms and content that it finds sensitive. So, for example, there will be people who will be wanting to post about the protests, but the word protest in Hong Kong is sensitive. So there are government administrators who are literally looking at posts that are coming in. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of these people, and they're literally removing posts that are too sensitive.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you, Kerry Allen, for bringing us that perspective.